take the Bible, and a lot of people don't because they say all kinds of things against it. But if you take it as one man, Jesus, who came to the planet and said, look, Earth is in turmoil. But that's because Lucifer was kicked out of heaven. He had to go someplace, and this was a beautiful planet, so he came here. This is why you have turmoil here. But you don't have to live in it. I just came to show you the steps because there is a higher being that will welcome you into that realm of thought. Does that make sense?
I'm here today with my friend Esther Luttrell, who has had some amazing experiences in her life. But first, I want to thank you, Esther, for joining me today and sharing your story with my viewers. It means the world to me. Your story is so impactful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. You are living your dream and your vision. And I am so grateful to be a part of it. Thank you.
And you have had some amazing experiences throughout your life. One of them being that your son made a transition to the spiritual realm far too early as a young man. And this really impacted the way that you lived your life and the things that started happening to you. Can you tell us, you have a book about Dean, your son. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I really thank you for mentioning that. It truly isn't so much about Dean, hun, as it is about Dean's mission. And what he made clear to me was to be my mission. Dean was 27 when he died, and he worked for an airline, although he was an aspiring filmmaker. Still going to, still going to become, the new Steven Spielberg one day. Anyway, Dean, when you fly a lot, you get it's not unusual to get a respiratory situation from all the recycled air that you breathe. It's kind of a thing that happens among people who work for airlines, fly a lot. So he was in the hospital just for a test. And the test became something more. A doctor tried an experimental drug on him. And I didn't know he was going to, I didn't even, never had seen the doctor before. I didn't even know he was there. But he used an experimental drug, and it killed him. So that was, such a shock. Leaving the hospital that night in the passenger seat with my husband driving, it was sunset. And I'm looking at the last star, the first star of the evening, in a purpling sky, and it's so beautiful. And I'm thinking, this is incredible. 3 hours ago, there was a Dean on the planet. Where is he now? We think we know until it hits you. And then it becomes not the Hallmark card of death and dying. It's so hard to grasp that that person is no longer on the planet. And then you ask that hard question. Forget the Bible. Forget all of the sweet things that people say to you. Where is he? That's all I wanted to know. And I wanted to know, are you all right? And are you still you? Those were the two questions I couldn't get out of my mind. And then all of a sudden, I saw a cover of a book, and it said, Dear Dean Mom. And I thought, what's that? And I heard, I don't know in what voice, but I heard it's a book. And I thought, well, how can I write a book about Dean? 27, he hadn't done anything, really. Uh, what is there to write about? And that's what happened for the next 13 years. I knew that somewhere there was a book. I know I had no way of connecting the things that happened to me over the next 13 years with people coming to me in the oddest places, under the oddest circumstances, walking up to me out of the blue and saying, excuse me, may I tell you a story? And they would start telling me about a loved one they just lost, or some story that had to do with death, but not death in the way we think of like movies, more a transition where their eyes were open toward another dimension. And I thought, what are you doing, God? What am I supposed to do with all these stories? They're fascinating, but why are they telling me? And then something happened right here in Topeka, which is where I live now, that one night when I thought that I would never get an answer 13 years later, and I realized that that's the book. I was to tell all these people's stories. And so I did. And right after Dean died, about a week later, I was at my daughter's house in New Jersey. And I was in the guest room. I was sitting on the side of the bed, not lying down. I was going to go to bed, but sitting on the side of the bed. The lights were out. And I was very aware of moonlight coming in through the lace curtains and thinking what a nice job she had done on the bedroom. And then, of course, every other moment, my mind went back to Dean. And so here came that thought again. If only I knew where you were, Dean. If only I knew you were all right. At that moment, and this, I swear it's true. Felt like I maybe I'm going to tell a little funny story here, but it's really true. At that moment, I felt a wind in my face that was so strong that had I had long hair, it would have been flowing back. It was like I had to catch my breath because there was such a wind in my face. And then I shut my eyes because it was such a brisk wind. Then I was aware of like Superman flying over a neighborhood street at night. Then we were over some plains, and then we were over a mountain. And then I was in space, just plain space. There were stars out there, but it was space. And I was aware that Dean was behind me, a little, a little to my left, but was behind me. And I saw we came to a stop on what looked like a moonscape. It was a planet with rocks and just what we think of when we think of a science fiction movie with a moonscape. In the distance, on the horizon, was like the moon rising. Right beside me, to my left, was a boulder, and I've always thought it was 13 or 14 feet high. I don't know why, but everything was a moonlight blue. And I thought, oh my gosh, I keep asking, where are you, Dean? I know now he's standing right beside me, a little behind me. But surely this isn't where he lives. This isn't the answer. It's so lonely. And so I said, where are we, Dean? And he said from behind me, this is where I come when I want to think, Mom. And I thought, oh, thank goodness he doesn't live here. And then I said, and what's that on the horizon, sweetheart? And he said, that's Earth, Mom. And there was a little chuckle with his voice. And then the whole thing just ended. And I am still sitting on the side of the bed. And I started crying because I knew that that had really happened. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a dream. I wasn't asleep. Dean let me know not only is he all right, but he has a quiet place he goes when he wants to think. And he shared that with me. And I just said, thank you, honey. Oh, thank you. And I lay down, and as I did, I put my head on the pillow. There was the most definite kiss on my cheek, damp, warm, and sweet. And I said, thank you again, darling. And I fell asleep. So I was very aware that he is all right.
That's such a beautiful story and validation that he's okay. And I can relate to that needing to know if they're still okay, where they're at, because I felt the same way when my husband died. And I needed to know. I didn't want to believe. So I completely understand where you're coming from, and that he was able to come to you and give you such a beautiful experience. That is absolutely remarkable. Um, what makes you think, or why do you think that some people can have visitations and experiences with their loved ones who's passed, while others struggle to find that?
I address that in the book. Uh, I'm trying to think. I'm editing in my head because we don't want a 3-hour story here. Just before Dean died, I had gone to visit him in Fresno. And we were just talking, and he said something, and I said, "Where did you ever hear that?" And he said, "Todd told me." Todd was my child that I had before I had Dean. He died of crib death at 3 months. And then it was 2 years later that Dean was born. I'm sure I had mentioned Todd through the years. He knew he had a brother before him. And he knew that all the time as I was pregnant with Dean, I would hold my tummy when he'd kick me, and I'd say, "Don't do that, Todd. Oh, that's not Todd. This is a new one." Because I was always calling him Todd. So I was stunned when he said, "Todd told me." And I said, "Todd?" He said, "Yes, my brother Todd, Mom." And I said, "Well, you talk to Todd?" And he said, "All the time, I always have." I said, "I didn't know that. You've never mentioned it." He said, "Well," I said, "What's he look like?" He said, "A lot like me." I said, "Well, where were you when you had this big conversation recently?" He said, "It wasn't a big conversation, Mom. I was shaving. I was in the bathroom in front of the mirror, and he was leaning against the door, and we were just chatting." I said, "That's remarkable." So later, when Dean died and he came to me, I had said, I think it's because we were both conditioned. We both believed in being able to make communication without really having had long conversations about it. We were open to it, receptive to it. And I think that made the pathway much easier. We had had an experience the December before his death in April. Um, can I tell you about it? I don't mean to hog the
Yes.
whole thing.
No, yes, please tell us about it.
Well, Dean had never been to my mother-in-law's home when I'd been married for 18 years, but he had never, she lived in Miami and we lived in LA in Seal Beach, California, actually. Anyway, so we were going to all go to Reva's house in Miami for Christmas. And we got there a day ahead of Dean. When Dean got in that night, we were in one guest room and he was in the next door guest room. So the next morning, Larry always, my husband, always got up early, and he and his mother read the Bible in the kitchen at the kitchen table early, even before daylight. I think that was just their ritual when they were together. So I was still in bed, and there's a little rap at the door, and it was Dean. And I said, "Come on in." And I scooted over, and he sat on the side of the bed. And I said, "Well, what's wrong?" I could tell he was very somber. And I said, "What's wrong, honey?" And he said, "Well, I don't know how to tell you, Mom." I said, "Well, just spit it out." He said, "Okay." Last night, it was late. And so I just got undressed and got in bed, turned out the light. And there was a little boy at the foot of my bed. I said, "What?" He said, "There was, Mom. I swear, a little boy." And I said, "Hello, who are you?" And he said, "Well, my name's John. Can you play with me?" And I said, "No, it's late and I have to go to sleep." And he said, then I said, "Mom, how old are you?" And he said, Mom, I think he said he was 9, but he looked more like 7. And he looked so sad. He was the saddest looking little boy I have ever seen. And I said, well, I'm sorry, John, but it's late and I've got to go to sleep. So I can't play with you. And the little boy vanished. And he said, Mom, I swear to you, that's exactly what happened. And I said, I wonder if there was ever a child that lived in this house. I've never heard of that. I've never heard there was. So when he went over back in his room, got dressed, I went downstairs. And now Dean is pouring himself coffee. Larry's at the breakfast table. Reva's fixing pancakes. I'm pouring a cup of coffee. And I say to Reva, my mother-in-law, Reva, was there ever a little boy about 9 years old named John that lived in this house? And I tell you, Taya, if looks could kill, I'd be dead. She turned around so angry and she stormed out of the room. And I looked at Larry and I said, what'd I do? He said, well, honey, you didn't know. I didn't know until just recently. I had a brother before I was ever born. He died. He was 9. His name was John. I said, but your mother is, he said, all these years, Esther, I never knew I had a brother. Never. And I said, that poor child, he has waited all these years to be acknowledged. So I don't remember how that hooks up to your question.
Well,
Yeah.
that was amazing. Another validating experience because he didn't know that that person ever existed. So there's no way that he could have just made that up, or it could have been subconscious programming. There was no knowledge of it. So I love the validating experiences involved here because it gives us some evidence. So these are the things that we have to base it on. And when we have validation, it's much more likely that this is an actual event. So thank you for sharing that.
Do you find that most people will tell you? In fact, I have a really dear friend who doesn't believe a word out of my mouth. And I tell her, "Do you think I'm lying?" And she said, "No, I think you want all of that to have happened, but I don't believe it did." And I said to her, if I went to the grocery store and I bought a loaf of bread, and I came back and I said to you, "Gee, I just went to the grocery store and bought a loaf of bread," and you said, "I don't believe you," what part of it wouldn't you believe, that I went to the grocery store, that I got the loaf of bread? And what I'm saying is that I am telling you something that happened. I'm not telling you why it happened or how it happened. I don't know. But I'm reporting this happened. So there's nothing to be, it's like if I tell you the sky is blue and you say I don't believe it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you do or don't believe. It doesn't change anything.
On
It's
that note, language is very hard to use to describe spiritual experiences. And so we try our best to describe things with the symbols that we call language that we have available to us, but they don't actually express the experience in its fullest. And so we have skeptics that use the same language that we use, but they use the words with a different meaning. And we have atheists who say they don't believe in God. And you and I were having an interesting conversation earlier about what God does atheists not believe in? And usually it's this white man up in the clouds with a big long white beard and shooting thunderbolts of lightning out of his fingertips to punish people. But that's not necessarily the God that we're talking about when we talk about God or the universe. What is God to you?
But I think that my answer is different now than it would have been 3 years ago, because I think that the James Webb Space Telescope is proving God. Are you keeping up with what that telescope is doing?
No, I'm not. So I'm interested to hear about this.
Well, I hope anybody who hears this will please go to NASA's website and look up the James Webb telescope. And there is, and you've heard of there is a heaven, and it's in we have our atmosphere, the stratosphere, and then there is a higher place. And this is where that telescope has taken us. And when you get to that, you're almost seeing things that are described in Genesis. So what is God to me? I think that's such a great question because the Sunday school God is really hard to understand. And you're made to feel so guilty if you don't love God, but you don't even have a face to put with him. And you don't feel, hey, do you love God? I love God. But you're a little kid going, I love God. You don't have a clue what God is. And as you get older and you find that you have the experiences like you have had, like so many people watching you right now have had, that and only that proves God. But if you haven't experienced it, I could talk until I'm purple. And you are not going to believe God anymore or any differently than you believe him right now because God is a perception. I perceive that everything that's happened to me that we call paranormal is simply God. Because you take the Bible, and a lot of people don't because they say all kinds of things against it. But if you take it as one man, Jesus, who came to the planet and said, look, Earth is in turmoil. But that's because Lucifer was kicked out of heaven. He had to go someplace, and this was a beautiful planet, so he came here. This is why you have turmoil here. But you don't have to live in it. I just came to show you the steps because there is a higher being that will welcome you into that realm of thought. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And that's a
I
beautiful.
out if it doesn't make sense in your post work. But what is God? God is what you turn to when you realize that there are no answers on this level. God is look. There are a lot of arguments, but I'm taking us far afield because we're not really here to talk about the Bible and God, and I apologize for that. I got off on a tangent. We're here to talk about paranormal as being perfectly normal. And that's what we really want people to know, not to be afraid of it. It isn't something spooky. It's actually as real as anything that we experience every day. Paranormal is perfectly normal. And our loved ones don't leave us. Life and love are eternal. And I love what you said about confirmation because today I sound so morbid. I'm talking about my son that died, and then I just told you about Todd that died 2 years before him. Today is actually the birthday of my daughter who died in 2008, and the one whose home I went to in New Jersey. And but I have to tell you the story. I had written Dear Dean Love Mom, and I was making a documentary about a 94-year-old World War II veteran. And he was so sharp, just so bright. And I loved to listen to him tell me the stories of music that I used in the documentary. I'd pick him up and we would go have a latte at Starbucks. That was our big day. And he'd tell me the stories, and I'd come home and I'd work on the documentary. So this night before I was to pick him up the next day to go for a latte, I'm working at the computer, and it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm just working away, just typing, typing, typing. All of a sudden, I smell this overwhelming smell of bread baking. Now, that's the most heavenly smell in the world, is baking bread. But it just permeated the room, and I stopped, and that's bread. Is that coming from my kitchen? Get up and I go in the kitchen, and I thought, do I have like a loaf of bread near a burner? But I have an electric stove, that wouldn't work. And then it hit me when I came back in and I sat down. Brooke and I shared bread recipes. We had hundreds and hundreds of them, and I got her 3 bread makers for some occasion just before she died. And I realized that's Brooke. And I said, honey, you made contact. Oh, I get it. The bread. Thank you, precious. I love you. I got to get busy though. I've got to pick AJ up in the morning. I love you. Thank you for doing that. And so the next day I pick AJ up and he gets in the car and we're on our way to a Starbucks. And he said, darndest thing happened to me in the middle of the night. I said, oh, he said, yeah, I was awakened. And he went on to say, I smell bread, like like a bakery. I said, you did? He said, I did. I got up and he said, I wondered, did I leave a loaf of bread to, he had a gas stove, so he could have left his near a burner. But he said, no, it wasn't that. He said, but when I walked through the living room, it was just as strong in there as it was in the bedroom, and it was everywhere. So I thought, well, it must be coming from outdoors. So I opened the front door, but it wasn't out there. It was in my house. And he said, I just went all over the house. I could not figure out what that strong smell was. And I said, well, I can tell you what it was, AJ. It's called confirmation. My daughter knew that I was going to go with you to have latte this morning at Starbucks. So she came to me at 2 o'clock and she let me know it was her because it was the smell of bread. And you had the same experience at 2 o'clock. Brooke wanted me to make sure that I knew that it was her and not a mistake. It's called confirmation. He accepted it, but tell me another answer. Do you have another answer?
There's not one that I can think of.
Me either. No,
Have you had other communications from your daughter or your son, Dean?
not Brooke. Not Brooke. That was the only one. But I feel like, today's her birthday and I'm thinking about her. I'm sure she's right here going, this is good, Mom. I like her. But Dean, the incident in New Jersey was, as I said, within a couple of weeks of him passing away at the hospital in Fresno. That was April 17th. Well, of 1994, so it wasn't yesterday. That's funny because I'm sure you had this with your husband. The first hour, you wonder how you're going to live. The end of the first day, you can't believe that the day has ended and there'll be no Dean in my case the next day. Then you say, how will I make it a week? How will I live? I can't I can't go on without him. Next thing you know, it's a month. And then it's a half year. Then it's a year. And now when I say 1994, it's incredible. I would have thought I would have made it the next 24 hours. So we do indeed go on. I had decided, says Dean wanted to be a filmmaker, and he always was bringing me scripts, and he'd say, Mom, I've got a great idea for a movie. And I said, great, put it in that box under my desk. When I have time, let's go through it and figure out what I can make a script of. How would you know you're not going to have a world of time when your child's 27? So now he's gone, and I'm sitting in my office across the room from my desk in a rocking chair. And I've just gotten word that I'm going to get his insurance money. And I don't want his insurance money. I want him. And I thought, what can I do with insurance money that would honor him? And I really heard a voice in my head. I don't know whose voice, maybe mine. But as I looked across at that box full of Dean's ideas for screenplays, I heard, that's it, Mom. I guess it was Dean, wasn't it? That's it. Go out and do for others what you wish you had done for me. So I decided I would take some insurance money and I'd go around the country giving screenwriting workshops, 3-day workshops. So I had been production coordinator on the television show Chips. So I called my old boss, my producer, Don Gold, and he was doing, I think he was producing Miami Vice at that time. And I called him and I said, Don, I just realized what I'm going to do with these insurance money. I'm going to go weekends across the country and give screenwriting workshops. You want to go? And he said, sure. When do we leave? So Dean and I mean, Don and I, Don Gold, and I struck out across the country. He would finish filming on Friday night, get on the red eye, join me on Saturday, whatever city I had chosen, and we would talk to young aspiring screenwriters, and I did for them what I wish I had done for Dean. Well, we were going to go to Texas. Uh, Kansas City was our first one, yes. There had been a story. My home is actually Florida. I'm from Florida. And there had been a magazine article about me and my screenwriting and all of that nonsense. And it was in some Florida magazine. So it was about 2 months before Don and I were to go on our first workshop. And they'd written about it in this Florida magazine. I'm standing at my desk, standing there. I just walked up to it. And the phone rang. So I'm still standing and I answer it. And this is this woman. And she introduced herself and she said, are you Esther Luttrell? And I said, yes. And she said, I'm not crazy. Okay. She said, but I'm in Florida and I have a magazine in front of me that has a big story about you. And I felt like I had picked up something that had electricity in it. I started shaking and crying. And I don't know why I would react to a story about you like that because I don't know you. I never heard of you before. And I just was reading the article. And I said, well, I don't know either. She said, I had to find out. I had to talk to you. I had to know why I would have a reaction like that. I said, I can't help you. I don't know it. And she said, oh, I don't know. Maybe I am crazy. She said, I'm just not thinking straight. My son just committed suicide and I'm just not handling it well. I'm sure I'm just an emotional basket case. And I said, oh, I can relate to that, sweetheart. I recently lost my son too. She said, you did? And she started telling me about her son and how he had himself. And I think she said he was 19. He was either 19 or 21, I don't recall. While she's talking, I'm still standing in front of my desk. My desk is pushed up against a picture window. On the other side of the picture window is about a 4-foot flower bed, and that's where the driveway stops. So as she's talking to me and telling me about her son, I glance up, and at the edge of the flower bed in the driveway is not only my son, but a young man I'd never seen before. And he was standing, Dean's standing here looking at me, and Dean is grinning like, hey, Mom, I've got the biggest surprise for you. His eyes were twinkling, his grin was so broad. He had on jeans and a plaid shirt. But this fellow next to him was about his age. He looked about his age. Dean looked very young for 27. And the kid's elbow was up on Dean's right shoulder. And he had on jeans too. He had one leg crossed in front of the other. And they were just looking at me and just grinning. And I said to the lady, I said, excuse me, my son is in my driveway. She said, your son? Because I just told her he died. I said, yes, but there's someone with him. And may I describe him to you? Because I thought, what if that's her son? And so I told her, I said, well, he's my son's height, which would make him 5'9", and he's about my son's build, except he's more toned than Dean, like he plays sports. And I remember saying, not football, like maybe basketball. And he's about my son's weight, but he has hair that comes down to his collar. He has on an aqua and white striped t-shirt. And there's something on the pocket. Now, at that time, alligators were popular on t-shirts, but it wasn't an alligator, I told her. It's a collar, aqua and white. He has on blue jeans and tennis shoes. And she said, what color is his hair? And I said, well, it's either a dark blonde or a light brown, but it looks natural curly. And it's very neat. It comes right to the top of his collar. And I said, and his eyes from here look hazel. Mainly, I'm noticing he's got deep dimples. And she said, oh my God, that is my son. And that's what he was wearing when he died. And then the boys, with this big twinkly grin at me, just vanished. I have no clue what she said after that. I don't know what the rest of our conversation was about. I think we were both in shock. But I thought later, uh, and I'll ask you, why do you think Dean didn't come to me and her son come to her? Why did her son come to me with Dean? What's your answer?
She may not have been open to seeing him. She needed to see him through you, or he needed to come to her through you because he couldn't come to her directly. That's my take when people don't get the signs or the symbols or the visitations, is that they're not ready or they're not open to it.
I think that's a great answer, Tia. And it could be the real answer. My answer is a little different in that had Dean come to me, I know even today I have a hard time believing that he really came to me that three-dimensionally. I mean, there was nothing ghostly about them. Uh, if I had not had this woman call me out of the blue, someone I never heard of, call me and be on the phone at the moment when Dean was there with her son, I would never have believed that really happened. She has to believe it because I described her son to her perfectly. Probably if he had come to her individually, we would have both chalked it up to mother's longing. Eventually, we would have rejected the fact that they were there. I know I would have, because I still question, how did that happen? It's every now and then it'll just hit me. You really saw him three-dimensionally. So to me, that's the reason. I think. I'm not sure, but does that
That's a
make
really
sense?
good point. I never thought about that before, is that you just don't trust yourself.
Right. It's a different kind of confirmation, you know,
Exactly.
because there's no other answer. I couldn't describe her son, a woman I never heard of in my life, could not have described her son. You know what? That also inadvertently answers another question, which is kind of why I like to tell that story. I think there is always a fear that if someone kills themselves, that they're doomed, that they have, it's all over. I think that answers that life and love are eternal, period. Period.
So, what is the most important message you feel you've gotten from Dean since his death?
I think that, how much more time do we have? I don't want to rattle on like,
About 10 minutes.
yeah, let me tell you what finally made me realize that those stories that came to me like that were what I was to write about, not Dean, not his, Dean was born here on this date, blah, blah, blah. And nobody cares about that. What we care about is that Dean brought a valid message for everybody who's open to hear it. That's that life and love are eternal. I'm going to try to tell this quickly. Uh, my friend Gail and I had gone to church one Sunday, and on the way home, I was driving, and she said, "What you going to do today?" And I said, "I'm going to go to Barnes and Nobles and drop by Starbucks, and I don't know." She said, "Starbucks? That's what we do on Wednesday nights." Now you got to remember, we're in Topeka. It's not like the entertainment capital of the world. That's a big deal to go to Starbucks every Wednesday night. You go get the magazines out of, Barnes and Nobles. You take them to your little table. You have real latte. That's your big deal on Wednesday night. So she's all upset now that I'm going to do this on Sunday night. And I said, "Well, Gail, not a big deal. I can go to Barnes and Nobles on Sunday if I want to. You're welcome to come along." And she said, "Okay." So that evening we go to Barnes and Nobles. She kept saying, "Why are we here?" And I said, "I just wanted to come to Barnes and Nobles. Just want a latte on a Sunday night." So we're there until we get our magazines and we have our latte. Time goes by and now they announce it's closing time. And I said to her, do you mind putting the magazines back? I've got to go to the restroom. She said, no. Now, I think every Barnes and Nobles around the country is shaped the same way. They're built the same way. In the center is an information booth. And so I went onto the restroom in the back. And as I was coming back, I'm shoulder to shoulder with a man who was at the information desk. And I'm getting ready to pass it. And I hear him say to the clerk, hello from heaven. Hello from heaven. Are you familiar with that, Tia? That
Hello
book?
from Heaven.
Bill Guggenheim and Judy wrote it. No?
Oh, yes, I've heard of that book.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd had a radio show in Florida and he'd been my guest and he was traveling around talking about his book. So I was very familiar with it. And that's all I heard this man say. A great big guy, like 6'3" or 4, and a big hunter's hat and hunter looking jacket. And that's all I heard him say was hello from heaven. It got my attention. So I stopped and I glanced at him and he looked at me like, yeah, lady, you got a problem. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stare, but you just said hello from heaven. And I'm very familiar with that book. And I was just surprised. And he said, you know that book? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, I've got to talk to you. I've got to take care of something here, but I've got to talk to you. Can I talk to you? And I said, well, my friend is waiting at the door, but we were just leaving. Sure, yes, I'll be at the door. So I went onto the door and I said to Gail, I think I know why I had to be here tonight. And she said, oh no, because she's so tired. Everywhere we went, people came to me with stories. So anyway, I wait at the door and here he comes, this great big 6-foot guy. And he says, tell me about Hello from Heaven. And I said, well, Bill and Judy Guggenheim were determined to write a book and to have interviews with people around the world who had communicated with loved ones without the assistance of a psychic or a Ouija board or crystal ball or anything else, just communication out of the blue and by surprise. And that's what they did. And that's what the book is about. It's Bill came to it ready to expose the whole thing because his wife Judy believed this and Bill didn't. So he was eager to write this book and show his wife what a silly idea. He became the biggest believer of them all. So he said, this man says to me, do you think that's possible? And I said, oh, I know it is. Yes. That people can come to you after they die. Yes, it's possible. And he said, I don't know. He said, I own a bed and breakfast ranch in Lawrence, which is 19 miles from Topeka. My son Jason was my best friend, my buddy, and he died. And it's not fair. There was an accident, he was killed. And I'm so mad. I am so mad at God. I just can't, I don't hear from him. I don't believe all of that. And I said, oh, but it's so true. And he said, how do you know? And I heard, first time I've ever really heard a loud voice in my head that, tell Dad I can't get through the anger. I heard that. And I said, oh, honey, your son wants so badly to communicate with you, but he can't get through your anger. And he said, what? And I said, yes, he will let you know he's all right if he can get through the anger. And he just started sobbing and he hugged me and he said, how do I do that? And I said, I don't know, darling. You're going to have to figure that one out. And he said, I have to tell you, he's, I had the worst day-to-day I've ever had. I didn't think I could live. I couldn't go on without my boy. And a friend came by and he saw the condition I was in and he told me about the book, Hello from Heaven. He said, you've got to read it. And he said, so I decided when I finished my work, I was going to go into Barnes and Nobles in Lawrence and go look for Hello from Heaven. He said, I got in my truck and I'm driving down the road and I'm going to go get this book. And I get close to downtown and everything in me said, keep going, keep going. You got to go to Topeka to Barnes and Nobles. He said, why would I do that? Why would I go 19 miles to Barnes and Nobles? We got a Barnes and Nobles right here. He said, but it was so strong that I actually did. I came right on here. And you happened to walk by at that moment, and you're telling me my son wants to communicate with me if he could get through the anger. And I said, yes. He just hugged me and he said, thank you, thank you, thank you for being my teacher. And then I realized, I said, no, honey, I am not a teacher. I'm just a messenger. And so when I left, I knew that he was going to be okay, but I also knew what I was supposed to do. I was a messenger. Everybody had, I thought I was more important. I thought I was supposed to write a book, me, an author or something. No, I was just the messenger, and I was to tell everybody's story and tell how all of these diverse situations, a man that sat next to me on a plane looked at me, a man in a three-piece business suit. I never talk to anybody. I can't hear on a plane. Don't want to talk to him. I hate to fly. I want to go to sleep, wake up, and be there. Don't want to talk. Man looked at me and he said, excuse me, may I tell you a story? Story I've never told anybody. I said, sure. He told me his story. A woman at a tomato bin. My husband's on the other side of the tomato bin. I'm at the tomato bin. Little woman next to me is looking at the tomatoes. She looks up at me and she said, may I tell you a story? My husband rolls his eyes and walks away because he knows what's coming. Over and over and over, I am hearing stories on. I keep saying, God, Dean, whoever is sending me these people, am I supposed to write screenplays about them? How many stories about deceased people can I write? Who would I sell them to? That one night with that man who lost his son and told me about it at Barnes and Nobles, it all fell into place. I was to write their stories. And so the next morning began, dear Dean loved Mom, and told everybody's story. Dean told me, and I believe him because my kid doesn't lie. Life and love are eternal, and paranormal is perfectly normal.
That is lovely, just lovely. And what a gift you are to the people who it was like a magnetic pull. Like they felt so comfortable. They felt called to tell you their story. That's such a gift for you and for them. Thank you
Thank,
for sharing that. And thank you for your book and your
thank you.
gifts and doing whatever you can to help people heal.
Now, have you told your story on a podcast?
Um, yes, I have on a couple little podcasts, not in complete detail. And I'll do one for this podcast as well eventually. I don't feel like doing it yet, but I know that it's coming.
Yes, yes. I think you see what's God? That's God. God will let you know.
Yeah,
You'll feel a feeling in the pit of your stomach that can't be mistaken for anything else. And you can't
exactly.
make it happen when it isn't there. You can't make it happen. God bless. Thank you so much for letting me tell my stories or other people's stories.
Esther, thank you so much for taking the time to be my guest. And it was amazing to spend this time with you and to hear about your experiences and your calling from God. Thank you.
Thank you, honey.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.